All right, we are now live. I'm going to give about a minute or so to allow our attendees to slowly but surely trickle in. Hello, everyone. Great, let's give a couple more seconds. I know there's another panel that's running slightly over, so I'll give another minute or so. All right, I see people slowly trickling in. Let's give it one more minute, and then we will delve into the conversation at hand, and everyone else can show up when they choose to. Hello, everyone. We're just waiting a couple minutes, a minute or so more, allowing people to trickle in. I see that we're slowly starting to populate with more attendees. Welcome, welcome. All right, I think that is a hearty amount, so let's delve right in. Good afternoon, everyone, or evening for those of you who are also on the East Coast. I'm Ruth Umoh, the editor-in-chief of The Filament, the first publication dedicated to diversity and inclusion in tech. It is an absolute pleasure to be chatting with Shelly Bell today, the founder and esteemed CEO of Black Girl Ventures. Welcome, Shelly.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. This is great. I'm excited.
As am I. Well, let's start with a bit of context. As I noted backstage, I obviously have done my digital sleuthing. I'm sure that our attendees know a bit about you, but I really want to dig into this initiative. You founded Black Girl Ventures in 2016. Talk to us about the impetus behind this initiative.
Yeah. And so as I mentioned, I have a brand new puppy who was absolutely cool until this moment. So if anybody hears that or sees me like trying to like wrangle him in the background. All right. So, starting Black Girl Ventures. I mean, to be honest, my thought was something needs to be done. I was building a business prior to this, and grew that. I had a print shop. And I'd gone through my own kind of entrepreneurial woes, I guess you could say. So I got laid off twice, decided I was not going back to work for anyone. And after a few different trials and tribulations, landed on a print shop, and then launched that from there, and then grew that doing like merch orders for Google, Amazon, people like that, small brand influencers, and vending. And so through that process, I learned a lot about supply diversity. I learned about just all these different pieces of like what it meant to run. I've lived many lives. Okay. I worked in workforce development for a bit, K through 12 education. I worked for the Patent and Trademark Office. I'm a computer scientist. I have all this mix of things that I brought into the space that also gave me like a really great look at the whole human being. I mean, when you work in K through 12 education and then you also go work in workforce development, you get a really good sense of like just things that people are dealing with on a regular basis and how they think about what it means to be educated or to build businesses. So building Black Girl Ventures was, hey, let's all get together. So the news had come out, Black women are starting businesses at 6 times the national average, yet receiving less than 1% of venture capital. Yeah. And I said, okay, let's do something about it. So I pulled a bunch of people together. We threw our money in a hat and we gave it away. The first event was a brunch, and we voted with like marbles and coffee mugs. I mean, I was not planning to be, I really at that moment had no idea that we would be here. Since that brunch in the living room, we now have scaled to service 12 cities or more. We're scaling constantly at the moment. But 12 cities we have efforts in. We also have funded over 130 women. We're the largest entrepreneur support organization on the East Coast. We have pretty large partnerships with major corporations like Nike, Visa, PayPal, and all around. Just what could we do? How could we activate civic engagement? If the powers that be won't move, then the people will.
Absolutely. Thank you for providing us with that very comprehensive overview. And we'll certainly be digging into a few of those various aspects. What's really interesting is that you have such a varied and diversified background. And I'm sure that the amalgamation of all those experiences certainly lent a hand in your ability to be very scrappy and build up something from a very grassroots level. Let me ask you this. What's interesting about Black Girl Ventures is that it's very much centered around this crowd-funded pitch competition. Why take this approach, and walk us through the elements of this competition and that process? Seems as though I have lost her. Give me one moment. Let's wait for her to come back on.
Yeah, I have no idea what just happened.
No worries at all. This is our new normal. Would you care for me to repeat this question, or did you hear it?
You said I have such a diversified background, and then I didn't hear the rest.
Yes, I said that you had such a diversified background, and I'm sure that the amalgamation of those various experiences really lent a hand in allowing you to be very scrappy and pursue an initiative like this at a very grassroots level. But I'm curious, why center Black Girl Ventures around this crowd-funded pitch competition? Why this approach, and walk us through said process?
Yeah, so, I mean, the premise of this comes from Black history. So in the early 1900s, during the Great Migration, Black people in Harlem could not afford to pay the rent because white landowners raised the rent. And what they did was they threw parties in their basements to create access to capital. And so these were not just any parties either. I mean, you had people like Fats Waller, Langston Hughes, Duke Ellington, all involved in helping people create access to capital so that they could stay in their homes. But again, it's like I said, if the systems that are in place are moving a lot slower than we need the help, then how could I activate civic engagement to participate in this journey? So, imagine Shark Tank meets Kickstarter. So people pitch, and then the audience actually donates to the pitch that they favor, and then we grant out to those founders. On top of that, we connect them to our network, and they're always looking for investors to connect them to. The average person who comes to Black Girl Ventures goes on to raise $70,000 more at least. And so when we look at that, what we know is we're instilling confidence, instilling the ability to just speak openly about your business and what it is. Also the ability to hear feedback and understand where to take that, how to make that move, what to leave, what to take with a grain of salt, and what to actually activate on. So I think that, for me, it was like, what could we do? Right? Like sometimes you could feel so powerless. Oh Lord, I'm sorry. Hey, relax. Sometimes you can feel so powerless as an underrepresented person in this country. And, that being a woman, that being a person of color. And so for me with Black Girl Ventures, it was, how could I make people feel powerful while also helping to sustain Black and brown women business owners?
Well, it seems as though you're certainly on that path. And one way that you've done so is through collaboration, really working with some very notable companies to be able to leverage in those connections to build this out at scale. A couple of the companies you mentioned, Nike, Warby Parker, Visa, Google. How did those collaborations come to fruition? And how does that then dovetail or support your mission?
Yeah, great question. So one of the things that I believe in is, and not even just me believing in it, but research also shows that one of the things that underrepresented founders lack or struggle with is access to influential networks. Mm-hmm. And so, even in building Black Girl Ventures, my thought was also, could I build something that was influential enough that could get people to actually activate on behalf of what we believe in, right? Mm-hmm. And I proved that over and over again across multiple industry verticals and multiple communities at this point. And so when I think about, there is capital attached to what we do. So when we partner with like Nike, we partner with Visa, we partner with PayPal, like our goal, we partner with Kroger, is to help infuse capital into Black and brown women businesses with the vehicle that we've built, which is the pitch competition. We also have a 9-month fellowship program which focuses on building ecosystem leaders. So not just being a business owner, but being a business leader. Because if we're going to need more voices at the table, then, me and Arlen Hamilton and, a handful of the other leaders, we can't do it all by ourselves. And so how will we build in succession planning into what we're doing? And that's also one of the things that comes along with the fellowship. Also with these companies, we look at storytelling. Like, how can we create more visibility for the efforts? How can we create more visibility for the women that we serve? Because that visibility helps them in turn be able to garner in more influential networks. Some of those examples are, we have a woman in our network who has a yogurt company called Sweet Kiwi. And, we listed her on the 10 Women to Watch. She's one of our founders. And through that, it's a yogurt company. Well, Dan and Yogurt reached out to her because of that. They saw the 10 Women to Watch. Those types of things. We have a woman, Kendra Woolridge, who's also one of our alumni. Through the DC competition, somebody anonymously gave $100,000 to her. This is change your life money for a founder who's been bootstrapping and using all of her own capital to push it forward. The lack of generational wealth in the Black community has historically hindered us from being able to, go to the uncle and say, hey, can you give me $10,000 to just try something out? Right. I was lucky in my journey that my mom actually gave me her retirement money to launch my print shop. And then I used my tax return to buy my own machines. So knowing the influential network struggle firsthand, and also knowing the access to capital struggle firsthand, these efforts, not only do they come with capital, but they come with the ability to sit at that intersection of social and financial capital to really help push our founders forward.
I think you hit the nail on the head with that response, because as we know, there is a lack of capital and operational resources that are, deployed to Black startup founders, particularly Black women, who very much are over-indexed as it concerns demographics of people of color. But we also focus very heavily on social capital. I often hear the refrain that your network is your net worth, which is certainly another thing that, Black people have found it difficult to capitalize off of. You noted the fact at the top of this conversation that you funded roughly 130 women. So can you expand a bit more and discuss some of the progress you've made in the last 4 or 5 years?
Yeah, for sure. Oh my, what is going on?
All right, let's give her another minute. This is our new normal in a COVID world. So we'll wait for her to return back shortly. Thank you all for your patience. She should hopefully be hopping back on shortly. And if anyone has any questions for Shelly, please do not hesitate to place some comments in the chat box. I'll be happy to front some her way. Devin, I think that's a great question. I will absolutely ask her that question. Okay. Things should be hopping back on shortly. Thank you again, everyone, for your patience.
What is, oh my, okay, so.
Welcome back. Our audience was waiting with bated breath. But
I have never had this many tech challenges. Like, just today is literally like, what is happening right now?
Perfectly fine. But we're happy that you're able to rejoin us. But I would love to hear about some of the progress you've made over the last 4 or 5 years. As I noted before, you funded roughly 130 women. Certainly a massive feat in and of itself. Expand upon that.
Yeah, great question. So, progress. Let's talk about that, right? I mean, when I started Black Girl Ventures, I was, thinking that we would be doing this in DC. Mm-hmm. And landed a partnership with Google Cloud for Startups. Mm-hmm. And that allowed us to really begin scaling across the country and trying this in different markets. Mm-hmm. What I have learned from this experience is that going into different markets, it is a skill set. Certain markets, and this is, if things I like to share with corporations that we work with, is that it's not as easy as just going into a market and saying, hey, y'all, I got a resource for you. Want it? Okay. Like that's not, there's a lot of trust that you have to build. Right. And so you can't just throw capital at the problem like that. We clearly have seen over the course of history that that's not the solution, but the trust and the relationship building is key. The first time we went into Baltimore, we had a woman that was one of our, she was the ambassador for us. She had pitched in DC and she's like, hey, you should bring it to Baltimore. And I did. And then that first year it was a hit, packed room, lots of donations. And then the next year we tried to go back and she was busy doing something else. Nobody really showed. And I'm like, I learned from that how to go into different markets. So when we went into Philly, we had conversations, relationship building. Went into Detroit, same things. Going into Cincinnati, now it is a matter of understanding that in order to make progress, you really have to think about your audience a little deeper than hey, I got a resource. Everybody needs capital, right? Let's just give it to them. That wasn't the case. Even as we started going into different markets, I had to figure a way to scale. And services are not easy to scale. Right. And so I was thinking, what could I do? And so the UN Marion Coffin Foundation granted us in order for us to test out piloting actual chapters in cities. And this meant getting 3 to 5 women on board locally and then basically teaching them what we do. So it's each one to teach one to fund one kind of model. Through that experience, I learned to scaling the service that way, the pros and cons of that, what it meant to truly serve hyper locally does mean you need to have ambassadors involved and engaged. It's so much bigger than the funding. Our work to get the women that we serve locally, visibility through press is a huge win for us. For them to become, for them to surface, out of the kind of shadows or just the surface of visibility through landing on the front page of the Business Journal in Birmingham, and then for people to be able to see that in a different place. So I think that, when I think about the progress of our efforts, yes, there's the funding. Right now our founders represent about 10 million in revenue and 3,000 jobs. We've been able, the average funding that someone may get from BGV is now at least between $2,000. And the thing is, what we realize is that you cannot negate what micro dollars can do. So first place wins 10K on top of whatever they raise. Second place wins 6K on top of whatever they raise. Third place wins 2,000 on top of whatever they raise. Mm-hmm. But even without the capital that we may give out, they're still averaging around that $2,000 mark. Well, with that, you can go to market. Even considering when the pandemic hit, everybody had to make some choices and decisions. You can keep your freelancers or your contractors another month with a couple $1,000s. You can also go direct to market or continue to run ads with a couple $1,000s. So we view ourselves as creating this constant infusion of capital to help keep people afloat. And that's what I feel progress is. I know sometimes people a silver bullet. Yeah. And the one thing that changed everything, and that's not realistic. It's not the way businesses work.
That it's interesting. You use the term that micro amounts, that micro funding. And then just for our audience, for a bit of context, it really is considerable and significant given the fact that Black founders typically on average only have about a month or two of runway. So I'm glad you brought up that point, Shelly. Let me quickly pivot to an audience question. While you're offline, I did ask them to please feel free to provide some questions directly to you. See a lot of comments, excited about your puppy, but this one comes from Devin Carlos. Can you talk about how you get founders from 0 to 1 in terms of knowledge, or do you focus on 1 to 2 level founders?
No, that's a great question. So in order to pitch with us, you have to be in business at least a year, and you have to be revenue generating. We don't do idea phase when it comes to being a part of the actual competition, or we have an accelerator program after called Jetpack. So once you come to the competition, you go through 6 weeks of training. That whole experience is for people who are in business and generating revenue. So when it comes to from getting them from 0 to 1, 1 to 2, a lot of it's community building. So we every Wednesday, in fact, we have virtual co-working, and this is where the peer mentoring piece happens. You know, getting founders to a certain place sometimes is not about like the organization, you know, being the big brother, big sister kind of thing. It is more about like getting people into the place where they can learn from each other. I feel like one of the most powerful things, like the pitch competition is powerful. A lot of the webinars and things like that are powerful, but this peer mentoring space is really key. Because people are able to ask things that they may even be nervous to ask somebody like me, right? Like meeting with me is a pretty high stakes meeting, or can be. So like being able to talk to each other and say, well, how did you solve that thing? Oh, that's where you got that resource from. Oh, that's where you're getting funding from. And so through our BGV Connect platform, I find it the best way to get founders from 0 to 1 and sometimes 1 to 2 is them being able to actually get into spaces with each other where they can mentor each other, because they're going to be able to give real time experience without anyone feeling like they owe each other, or without feeling like, well, what if I say the wrong thing to this person who has a lot of power, or that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Quick follow up to that question, and you touched on this a bit already. In terms of equity crowdfunding, how do you get the community involved?
Yeah, so at the moment, we're not equity crowdfunding. It's pure granting for us, but that is in the cards, I would say. We do have a proprietary software that we use. The original one is called SheRaise. It's the one that's live right now. But in the coming weeks, we will launch Raisify, which is going to be built off of the premise of the voting and the donating and the crowdfunding, and almost gamifying pitching, really. And we're going to open that platform. We're opening Raisify up to be available to other accelerators and incubator programs to be able to gamify their demo nights and their pitch competitions to allow more people into the pool to give funding. So everybody stay tuned for that. So at the moment, it's not equity crowdfunding. It is pure granting. Like I said, I do think that equity crowdfunding will be something that we'll be visiting in the near future. For now, I think I feel like our efforts and like equity crowdfunding efforts are supportive of each other in the sense of getting more people to activate in the startup space. Right. So we're a nonprofit, but nonprofit it means we're in business for a different reason. We're in business nonetheless. And so I tell people all the time, like, the type of business entity may speak to the reason why you're in business, but you're in business nonetheless. So we're a startup with a nonprofit designation as well. Look at it. And so with that, we're always looking at like, well, what else needs to be inserted into the ecosystem to really help founders thrive? It's time for us to start looking at the life cycle of participants and not like efforts against efforts, or like they're already doing that or they're already doing that, but more like if this founder had 3 touch points from my organization, your organization, somebody else's organization, if this founder had equity crowdfunding plus efforts with BGV on Raisify, plus, equity investment, like blended capital stacks, I feel like are what we need to be focused on. It's not just going to be, one way or the other.
We have just a few more minutes here, and I do want to be judicious about the time. I want to throw it back to 2020. The death of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and the ensuing civil unrest that swept the nation, if not the globe, really drove the VC ecosystem to become far more self-reflective and slightly more introspective, and in some instances, publicly commit, as did corporate leaders, to diversifying internally, but also taking an external approach to how and in whom they're invested. How has this heightened awareness, if you will, impacted Black Girl Ventures, and how are you leveraging off of that?
Yeah, I think what I call it the awakening. I feel like in that moment, people were waking up to realities that they just hadn't faced. And that's across the board, across multiple different ethnicities, backgrounds, identities. And that awakening was, oh, maybe something is happening, right? It was more like, oh, well, like this, I think sometimes people had ignored where they're like, oh, if the police stopped you or if the police arrested you, you must have done something, right? And in this case, it was like, no matter what this person did, they did not deserve this. And so I think that that caused a lot of people to say, oh, well, what else has this community or group of people not deserved? Like, what else has happened that they didn't deserve, right? Like if your business idea is, not sound, if it's not scalable, if it's not that, okay, right? But if you didn't get the meeting that you deserved, if you didn't get the shot that you deserved, the opportunity that you deserved, that's a whole different conversation, right? The way that this has impacted us at BGV is one, when the pandemic hit, we were the ones hearing the stories. So we immediately pivoted into all virtual because we were doing things in person at first. Immediately launched a virtual community with this consistent meeting, co-working, peer mentoring every week. And that's what we're hearing the stories. Oh my God, I lost 2 months of customers in one day. Oh my goodness, this is happening. And then with the murder of George Floyd and this moment of awakening, we had a lot of people reach out to us. A lot of corporations that reached out to us. A lot of them were ready to hear what we had to say. And I'm thankful that we were ready. We have been doing the work. We had the receipt. We still got the receipts for the work, the results and the outcomes. We had that. But just like any other founder, I was on the path to raising too.
Yeah.
And so when something like this happens in a world that opens up people's eyes, they're a lot more apt to listen. So, it was helpful to be able to walk into meetings and say, this is what I've been saying needs to happen. Like, I've been saying this. Thank you so much for listening to me now. Right. Or being able, or the powers that be within your organization. So I want to give a huge shout out to all of the corporate employees out there, all of the affinity groups and ERGs out there. You're the real MVPs. These were the people who were saying, oh, no, we need to talk to them. These were the people who were researching us, reading our articles, reading our website. Like, they were doing the diligence. Yeah. We didn't get a lot of just because you're Black, we want to fund you. We got a lot of like, we read your story. We looked at every available piece of media. We looked at your IG timeline. We looked at everything about you, and you have the story and you have the people that we want to rock with. And I really appreciated that level of diligence.
Absolutely. Well, we piggybacked to the past, and I now want to pivot and look at the future. What's next for you? We're now in Q2 of 2021, coming out of the pandemic, moving full steam ahead. What's next for Black Girl Ventures?
World domination. But we're going. I want to gamify pitching. I want to turn the pitch competition into an actual game. And make it so that we can actually create more access to capital for people who wouldn't typically have it. I also want to, like I said, we're launching this new platform called Razorify, and we see that as an opportunity for other accelerators and incubators to be able to use what I've built for themselves and for their demo days. We have a tournament style pitch competition that is coming up on April 29th and 30th that we're doing with Nike. And so this will be our first journey into looking at what does it mean to be a business athlete, and putting your pitches to the test. And so there'll be 3 rounds. There'll be elimination. In the last round, the audience will get to vote. And so we're doing a production around it. And so blackgirlventures.org, make sure you sign up for the email list and are following us across social media to stay involved, because it's going to be pretty exciting.
I'm sure. Well, we are now at the end of our time. Thank you so much, Shelly, for such an insightful conversation. I'm sure I speak for all of our audience members when I say that I'm truly excited to follow along in your career success on this journey, and we're rooting you on. So thank you.
Thank you. This is great.
Thank you. Bye, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in.